Greg Schleusner onto stage because he's leading or joint leading the technical room with Dennis Sheldon. Greg is a director with HOK Architects.
Thank you, Richard. So, as was mentioned by Jeff and other things, there's a lot going on and a lot of work to do. So what I'll quickly try to do is get you up to speed in the work we're doing. So I think it's always important to sort of just talk through who the clients of the technical room are. It's sort of a continuous navigation of what the user rooms are needing to do, what the future of the industry wants to really support using open technologies, and then making sure the technology doesn't drive the approach or fundamentally the result. And so these are always what we come back to, that our aim is to make it easy to develop our solutions, but at the same time not lose sight of our users, members, and the users are the main audience for our approach. So I've brought this slide before. We are really trying to move away from a standard and a publishing method that we just produce documentation for our work and move to something that enables the industry. So our peers produce software technologies and usable standards. We're trying to make sure we're enabling that. And so during this week, we went through several sessions that talked about specifically these things. First off, about our release strategy. There's a lot of words there, but fundamentally, we went through the technical approaches that we're taking to really put a strong amount of rigor on both the releases that the community can understand, but then also versioning and everything we need to do to make sure as we move into a very distributed future, things like archived data sets that are linked to the web can always make sure they know where they came from. These are very complex things, but we have to do the work to enable. As Jeff mentioned, looking to establish a potential process that uses the past process within ISO. And then one of the things that's been discussed in all of this is going to end up in a proposal, it's not anything final, is the idea that if we link the standards process with a rigorous software testing method, that we could look at doing a tranche-based approach that if you're part of the process early on, we have a window of time you can get certified and look at a delay if that's not something you're looking to do, because we want to make sure we can enforce and reinforce this idea of testing standard, and continue to move that forward. Fundamentally, this will move forward with a proposal to the SCTE, which then gets voted on to determine if it should be finalized into policy. So modernization, there's tons of technical detail here, so I won't go into it, but it really means how do we make it transactable, distributed, concise, and traceable. I think that's an important thing. The idea that you can externally reference data within our standards much more easily. One of the big themes that you see in a lot of areas is the opportunity, not the necessity, to separate geometry from information and keep them in sync. And then modularity. This basically means when you're interacting with our huge set of standards, you don't have to, if you're a future utility owner, you don't have to know about all the doors in the standard when you want to make a small transaction. So in 5 and 6, we talked about toolkits, and there's a really long list of places that software comes into play, but as both Richard and Jeffrey mentioned, this idea around connecting IDM, MVD, and our actual standards through a machine-readable way. So we certainly saw a proposal for IDM machine readability, and then proposals for MVD XML and MVD XML Lite, which, just for clarity, IDM is the user description. It's a very summary way of looking at it. User description of a process, where the MVD is a subset of buildingSMART standards in a computer-readable way. So putting those two together is an important aspect. BSTD IFC links. So again, we've had the capability, and I think people have been discussing this for a number of years, of describing, making it a link between BSTD and the IFC standard, and then making that enabling that at the user level through technology. But we have not really had a robust process of documenting it and then determining how that needs to be advanced in such a way that in 15 years' time, someone were to export a file, put it on a shelf and look at it, they would know what version of BSTD they were pointing at that point in time, where the property set definitions came from. Those are all, again, very complex things we need to make sure we work through, from everything from the way BSTD functions to the way we manage our standards to the software implementation, so we can track that life cycle. And this is an important concept if we're going to have a distributed approach to our data. And again, this would manifest itself, and it's quite far along, but we've added some information that will come out of the week's meetings, and that will again be a proposal to the SETE as sort of what the work items specifically need to be here. And then we've had conversations around linked data for years. I think we've had a very good experience when it comes to figuring out how our current data structures do work, but maybe not work efficiently within a linked data approach to the world. So we did two things at the end. We talked about the experiences with moving Express to OWL, understanding the way our structures, including IFC, BSTD, and other externalized pieces of data linked together. And so we went through a review of that. And fundamentally, I think the most important aspect here is understanding that as we have Express technology, XML, JSON, linked data, there's probably several good uses of all of those things, and making sure we actually think of them that way and start to identify primary use cases for them. So it could be that a linked data approach is perfectly fine for a distributed management operations environment because the design data isn't changing all the time, and the link to geometry needs to be there but doesn't need to be as robust, where in the design phase maybe it's entirely required that those two things are bound quite tightly together. So those are the conversations we need to have, and I think are important to inform the way we approach using the technologies. And then IFC doc is something that's been around for a while. If you've participated, you've seen presentations on it. I think one of the things me personally, have seen as a failure is not understanding the robustness of it. So this was really originally developed by Tim Chipman. John Merchant and a few others have taken on the work of expanding on it. This is really the tool that we've used to document, define, and standardize the schema, but it turns out it's a wealth of capability that we're just now seeing the benefits of as we start to develop on top of it. So that will most likely become a basis of a lot of our software-first efforts within the industry, because it's a toolkit, it's a standard, a way to modify the standards, interact with BSTD, and so forth. So we'll see more of that. I think I'm blanking on the gentleman's name, but was very excited to see we can serialize back and forth between XML and UML, and made his day. So these are very small things, but they're important. They're not small. They're very important things, but they're behind the scenes, and it's certainly not me that are doing it, so it's important to recognize those activities. And two things that came out of the roundtables, I didn't get a chance to take part in all of them. I was at two of them, and this is certainly the buildingSMART scope that we need to look at coming out of those two efforts. Digital twins, it's a very popular term. I actually think it's nearly impossible to define at this moment clearly, but I think it's important because this actually gives us a framework to talk about the scope that we need to think about. You don't need to have a precise definition to know that it might imply in a rail environment that you need bidirectional design operations workflows, where in a single building, maybe that's not nearly as important. So all those concepts will manifest themselves. Things that we need to understand are links to international efforts, and then I think it was Brigitte Schock suggested that there's a possibility of being involved with a partnership to actually work on a physical digital twin as part of our proof of concept efforts that would be moved forward, and Wolfgang is definitely leading those, led that discussion. And then we had another very interesting discussion that started with the word OpenCDE, and as soon as you put the word CDE on something, everybody has an opinion. So as we discussed it, it made sense to really bring it back to what the effort would really want to be, is taking the work we've done already within BCF and BCF's APIs and start to expand that into something that approach adds to our capabilities to express our data on the web. Obviously, the CDE approach, a data environment where we manage a lot of information, is a good place to start, but the approach is to make it modular and enable mixing and matching of those things as we move forward. So all of this is important for us to make sure our view of the world is not on an island. We have to interact with a very large world, and our world is becoming larger, so it's important that we don't even think of ourselves as an island these days. So this is fundamentally what we worked on during the week. To do this, as I mentioned before, we're working to make a much more robust and broad steering committee to make sure our work is addressing all topics, and that's always something that's hard to do, but it's important we make this step. And thank you.